Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. And we'll start with Mr. Menke, and thanks again for being here today. In your testimony, you touched on how inflation has created that gap for those that in insurance coverage, leading to the reliance on USDA and the SBA programs, those that were impacted by those storms earlier this year. The state of Iowa even had to create bridge funding for farmers to cover loan interest payments. You talked about how Governor Reynolds started this program. How has that program been received by Iowans, especially in our rural areas? And are there any other areas that the state has been able to fill in those gaps left behind by our federal programs?
Well, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship does not run that new program, but I can tell you in our conversations with Governor Reynolds that the programs have been very well received, especially by the farming community. And again, that program offers up to $50,000 to reimburse 1 year of scheduled interest owed on a disaster loan. And this is important because what we've heard from farmers after the tornadoes and floods was frustration that deferred interest option was not available for disaster loan assistance. We know that the applicants for this program are dispersed well among the 29 disaster counties in the state of Iowa, and we expect an uptick in the usage of those programs once more insurance claims are settled. So, I mean, there are so many farms that have been affected by this, and I know you've spent a lot of time in Shelby County. We had 74 properties that were severely damaged or destroyed just in that county, including 48 homes, 75 grain bins, 16 livestock confinements, and 170 barns. So this type of assistance is very, very key, and that's why having parity between those loans would be very important. Two other programs that the state stood up were related to housing. One was to provide temporary housing for up to 6 months at no cost for eligible disaster survivors as they pursue long-term housing solutions. And the other was a disaster repair program to provide up to $50,000 for the repair of disaster-impacted homes that aren't covered. They're outside the scope of insurance or FEMA individual assistance. So the state of Iowa has definitely stepped up to fill some of those gaps.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And spoke to a gentleman from the Iowa State Extension Service as well today, and they were talking extensively about how they can stand up just temporary housing in the meantime until they can mobilize contractors to even get into those areas to build. That's such a struggle right now. Mr. Barker, again, thanks for joining us. It's good to have you here. And in your testimony, you discussed how paperwork burdens and SBA's decision to move their loan approval authority to San Francisco in California and the coasts presents challenges for our rural areas. Can you discuss problems you faced when interacting with SBA loan offices that don't truly understand who they are serving?
You know, this dates back a lot of years. When they moved that office, I had great success with SBA as a young baby banker, and they were wonderful to work with. I knew the loan officers that SBA had locally and could deal with that. The minute that switched and went out west, any application that I sent out there was delayed. I didn't have the same person to talk to. I had conflicting requests of what I needed to do. And I guess it was basically a major communication snafu. And from talking to my friends in Rock Valley, that's exactly what they're running up against in the disaster programs as well. I saw it in 2008 in the floods there. Total disconnect. There were multiple people giving multiple answers. They didn't match. And when we're out there, the bankers didn't know the disaster programs any better than the public, and we're trying to help, and we're just as lost as they are, and it did create much frustration that way.
Right, and I do know because we spoke to a number of constituents that had the SBA reps that came in. They had to come into the state of Iowa. They weren't local they were providing bad and outdated information, which is absolutely unacceptable. You also mentioned that community banks can oftentimes provide better loan terms and less confusion than SBA. How do you manage that?
Well, they talk to us directly. We give them the same answer every time they come in. Our paperwork is standardized. We know exactly what they have to sign. The folks up in Rock Valley with the different people they're talking to get different requests for different forms from different people, and they don't match, and there's no rhyme or reason why they are, and then they're doing duplications of it, and it's just a confusing mess. Again, the communication issue is a mess. We can talk one-on-one. We give them guidance and help them through the process.
Yeah, thank you. Personal ownership and a sense of community, very important. And do we have time to?
Sure.
Yes, Ms. Lang, thank you for being here. And I am concerned that federal agencies are removing field staff and replacing them with more bureaucrats in Washington. It goes back to some of the issues we've heard today. And that, of course, is wrapped up into some of the telework policies that exist here in D.C. In your testimony, you mentioned as part of SBA and USDA's MOU, more can be done to coordinate field staff. Can you discuss your experiences with the gaps in coordination and what can be done to better utilize federal field staff?
I believe that's one of the challenges that everyone has faced is having proper staff, having enough staff. Through COVID, it all just went crazy. One of the biggest differences, back to what Mr. Barker said, is if you're trying to find a person at SBA, you email 7A questions. You don't call. USDA, you've got people. You can pick up the phone. They have state offices that are staffed. You call them, you tell, like every time we have a new loan in a state we haven't worked in, that's the first thing we do. We pick up the phone, we call them, we introduce ourselves. Hey, this is our project. We would like to work with you, all the things. And a lot of times they'll give us really good advice. Also, if we need to, we can go to national office depending on the size of the loan with USDA. So the telework is a challenge. There's some people that are really good at it and some people that are really not, as you've probably seen yourself. So I mean, it's just so interesting to me how different they're set up. But finding a person and getting advice is kind of priceless.
Right, absolutely, it is. And final question for Mr. Luz. Thanks again for making the trip to D.C. And in your testimony, you discussed the challenges rural businesses face accessing broadband. That is a big topic here in this committee and many others. Can you elaborate on the challenges and how you've seemed to overcome those?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. I shared a little bit more earlier about my story with just trying to find an office space for my business.
Right.
It was a challenge, and we're in a small city. The office spaces I looked at, either we couldn't get fiber to them, or some of them, one was in a newer industrial park, it was $28,000 to get fiber to it. So it's just not feasible for a small business to be expected to outlay that kind of capital just to get good broadband. So it's crucial, and we really need it in rural areas to level the playing field with businesses in urban areas who have cheaper, easier access to those things.
But you were able to overcome that then. There are some programs that have connected your area.
Yeah, so the old church building I found that was sitting vacant for 10 years had fiber on the poles across the street. So that was part of the reason that motivated me to undertake this somewhat insane project of taking a 150-year-old church and turning it into an office and a beer garden.
Right. Well, good on you. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm sure we'd all enjoy coming to visit the beer garden. Senator Hickenlooper.